Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. Sarah Reeder is here from AFHappraisal.com. Now, Sarah Reeder is the CEO of the company Artifactual History Appraisal. She is an appraiser of art and antiques. She is a certified member of the Appraisers Association of America and a certified member of the International Society of Appraisers with the Private Client Services designation for working with high net worth individuals. Sarah has worked at the Smithsonian Institution, Library of Congress, Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, as well as positions as a subject specialist at auction houses, appraising consigned items in all areas, cataloging, fine art, silver, ceramics, furniture, and other items at auction. So we are going to find out how Sarah does her marketing. She has a magazine. I believe she has a podcast and just has all these different facets of her life. And it's going to be quite an exciting thrill ride to find out how she juggles it all, manages it all, but also communicates this. Somehow it's like a dull subject, but also really exciting at the same time, right? Antique. So we'll find out from the master herself, Sarah. So glad to be speaking with you, Sarah.
Well, thank you, Robert. I'm excited to be here today. Yeah, and it's really fascinating to be in a role where I get to talk about what I do, because one of the things that most people don't realize about appraisers is we're not actually allowed to talk about what we do. There's something called the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which is a law from 1999, and we think about it as regulating banks in terms of client confidentiality, but appraisers actually fall under that as well. So we're not allowed to talk about our clients, we're not allowed to talk about our work. And when I first started my business, it was a quandary. It's like, well, how do I talk about what I do when I can't talk about what I do? And it's actually been very liberating, because what I have found to be my way through it, and it's, individual for everyone, what feels aligned is because I can't talk about what I do, I love to just share what's exciting me, what I find passionate about, the topics in the art and antique field, which, is not related to what I'm working on at any given time. I actually try to be very careful to never post about anything I may be researching for a specific client assignment at the time that I'm researching it. But it's great because it liberates me to just share what I love and find exciting about art and antiques and what drew me to the field in the first place. And I think that is actually a lot more fun for me to create. And hopefully it's a lot more fun for the people who are receiving that content to receive and think of, oh, this isn't just dull, it's not dusty old things. There's this entire, complex world to art and antiques that a lot of people don't realize is there.
And I can relate to that. Just sometimes you're working on this one task that's kind of the main project, and then your subconscious works on like, hey, I should blog about something that's like unrelated. It's almost like you give your brain's working on this one thing that's your focus, and then in the background there's kind of some other things happening that are, as you said, completely unrelated. And so when you think of like appraisers, you think of things like Antiques Roadshow, right? It's broadcast, it's publicized. And so why is there kind of the confidentiality, the secrecy? Is it like to prevent the gossip, or like the criminals, or the price inflation, or like why is there the sort of secrecy aspect?
Well, it's the fiduciary responsibility. So, just like banks have this, it's financial information that we're working with, because it's talking about value. And so Antiques Roadshow is actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's what I find most people, when they hear the word appraiser, they're like, oh, so it's like Antiques Roadshow, right? And I'm like, oh, not quite. It's a little bit different than that. Because, and the show has done so much to raise awareness for the art and antique field, which is great, but they only show the interesting part, because of course nobody wants to watch the rest of it. And so it leaves out all of the, the research specifically and hard work that goes into that little clip you see at the end. And so, but the reason why, we can't talk about the work we're doing under the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act is that we have this responsibility to maintain the confidentiality of our clients, because we are working with financial information. And there are instances where clients make information public, or they grant an appraiser permission to talk about a project. That does happen. And so if you ever see someone who's speaking publicly about a project, it's probably because they have the disclosure that they can. But generally speaking, it's something that we all are bound by, and it makes it hard, because unlike most businesses where it's like, hey, I worked with this great client last week, here are all the specifics of what I did, like we can't say that.
So it's a limitation that you can, but also possibly turn into a strength. And so, I mean, educate me a little bit about this whole antiquing thing. Like, I know there's all these different like aspects, like subcategories of it. We mentioned like, furniture and things like that. But like for me as a layperson, you say you're an appraiser, like what would I need or want to know about your field?
Sure. A lot of the people that we as appraisers work with need appraisals for a couple different categories, major categories. One is for insurance coverage. Like if someone has a art collection with some really nice paintings in it, they probably, depending on their insurance policy, will need to get a written appraisal report, which is different than what you see on TV. That's just people talking, which is really entertaining. But in order for your insurance company to actually say, yes, we're going to give you money if something happens to these items, you need a written appraisal report, which is a legal document. And it's, a pretty extensive process in terms of what we're bound by as appraisers to document in that appraisal report. There's something called the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, which we have to be compliant with the USPAP standards. And so it's kind of like being a tax accountant for art and antiques. Like it's that level of fiddliness in what we have to do, but that's because it's a really important role for the clients. They need to have, their collection protected for insurance. And then also in estate situations, if someone dies, depending on how their estate was structured, they may need to have the tangible personal property in the estate appraised at fair market value for estate filing and government and taxes and all that fun stuff. Then if someone's donating something, then, depending on the circumstances, they may need a non-cash charitable donation appraisal report in order to be able to substantiate that donation for their taxes in the future. And so they're not generally fun intended uses, but they're really important intended uses, and they help protect the consumer or the person who has the items.
Okay, so a very much needed service. And then, so then, and I'm always nervous when I think about, okay, the stereotypes that I've seen on TV, right? Like you watch like Grey's Anatomy and then try to talk to a doctor, or you watch like Suits and then try to talk to a lawyer. And and for some reason, like what comes kind of in my head is that there's the show White Collar, where like the guy, like they go and see like, is this art a forgery? And he takes the little magnifying glass and he's like, oh, I know the stitching is from a 16th century, whatever. And like, I know that this is worthless. It's totally fake. And so, like, when you go in to do one of these appraisals, like, how do you even like approach that? Because like on TV, I'm sure it's completely inaccurate. But then, how do you go in and do this whole appraisal? Do you like know ahead of time what the items are and like what to look for? Is there like the authentication or certificates, or like how do you even like do this process?
Sure. Yeah. And I used to watch the White Collar TV show. So I love that you brought that up. That was really fun. It was, I the more people can get exposure, at least to the big picture part of that work, I think that's very positive. Usually I like to, have a sense of what I'm going in to see before I go there, because I'm trying to assess, am I the right appraiser for that person's needs? There are appraisers for every potential kind of item out there. And so if it's an item that I don't have expertise in, I'm not going to take on the assignment. There's something in USPAP called the competency rule, which is just like what it says. If you're not competent to appraise it, you shouldn't. And so most appraisers, we try to get a sense of what are the items so that we can make sure we're actually going to be the best fit for that person's needs. And in terms of, since we first have that first filter, the items we're going to go look at are items that we have experience appraising. The bit with the loop, I love the loop. We all have loops in our bags, or I have multiple loops in my bag. But for items in our areas of expertise, yes, it usually is fairly simple if something's like really obviously fake, because we work with them so frequently. We're like, okay, this is a problematic detail. But one thing that isn't commonly known is that appraisers are not authenticators. That, a lot of people reach out to me and they think I can provide them with authentication services, and that's not true. There are some appraisers who happen to also be authenticators, but they're very distinct fields and like very different training, and so appraisers most typically work with authenticators, or we can, recommend authenticators to our clients who are looking for that service. But we ourselves generally, unless it's that rare person who happens to be both, don't provide that.
And this is good to know, right? There's this whole world that, I mean, I'm sure you're in it, but like a lot of us are just like, who knew that there are all these like specific types of appraisers, and there's authenticators, and there's just all this educating that can be exciting, a whole rabbit hole that we can go down. And that kind of relates to, we mentioned kind of at the beginning that you have the blog and you have the magazine and you kind of have this part of your business where you're just bringing all this awareness because there's, I mean, there's such a history, right? There's like centuries, millennia, all these different countries and cultures and all these objects that have been created and stored and just so much for us to know. And so how does what you do relate to the teaching, and how do you like stay on top of this, and how do you keep your profile going? Like how do you just manage this mess of, okay, I have to do the work, but I also need to kind of do the teaching, maybe for fun, maybe to raise my profile too.
Yeah, well, how to stay on top of it all, that's the perennial struggle, right? But it's more that well, first of all, the magazine, I'm co-founder and co-editor. So I run it together with Courtney Alstrom Christie, who's an appraiser based in Georgia. And so we share the work with that. So that helps, but it's that to me, it all is one holistic kind of creature, and that the work I do with the magazine and the articles I write for the magazine, and we have a lot of other great contributors, so it's definitely not just me writing for the magazine, but I feel like that then informs my appraisal practice because people can find those articles and learn about the process. And then by the time they reach out to me, they already are coming from a place of increased knowledge. And so they feel more confident in knowing what they need, and then it saves all of us time because I don't have to start from the beginning explaining because they already have had that opportunity to learn. And really for when we first started Worthwhile Magazine, so worthwhilemagazine.com, it's free online for everybody. It was in 2018, and we both were very passionate about making access to this kind of information available for free because it was very hard to get information like that. There were a couple earlier journals which were great pioneering resources, but going forward, we really saw a need to, particularly for the general public, have a place where people could learn. And so to not be taken advantage of by people who, are not following the rules, and also just to help protect themselves in instances where, to prevent a situation where someone thought, I really should have had an insurance appraisal because now my house burned down and I don't have the things anymore. And so it really evolved from that. And it all just kind of feeds into each other. Like part of a podcast with my good friend Larissa Wild, the Art Elevator podcast, that supports education. And so it's all one animal for me.
Wonderful. And so, yeah, we definitely need to have that education because, like you said, there's things we don't know that we don't know. And then even if when you are required, then it helps to kind of know already ahead of time what it is that a person's getting themselves into. And so in your journey here of getting educated and working with all these amazing clients and doing the podcast and the magazine, are there any fun, stressful, unexpected events that happened along your journey that you feel like sharing?
Oh, goodness. Not really. But I think the thing I would say as a public service announcement for everybody is if you know you have a deadline and you need to hire an appraiser, start early. Because often what happens for those of us in the field is that we have, 14 people who all have a deadline and they reach out really tight. And so that adds a lot of extra stress to our job because it's quite meticulous what we have to do. And so it's just the perennial equation of it takes a lot of focus and a lot of time and a lot of research to do what we do. And then there aren't that many of us doing it. So just trying to, keep the treadmill going in a way that is efficient is perennial challenge.
And that's just a great life lesson in general, right? Is to those important deadlines that you have, if possible, do it ahead of time just because there is something to be said about approaching something with different mindsets and not being in a rush and not having to say, okay, well, I need to jump in on this for 10 minutes and go back and do something else. And sometimes, even like we were saying earlier, sometimes you're working on project A and then you let your mind relax and you kind of have a breakthrough somewhere else. And you can't get that if you're like, I need to do this by tomorrow. So it's just good advice in general. And especially where money and finances are involved to do whatever needs to be done, maybe not as early as possible, but earlier than your common sense tells you need to do. That way, maybe the reality will catch up and you'll have just enough time to get this appraisal done or just get whatever figured out ahead of time before whatever deadline is in front of you, especially when money or when other people involved. And so, this is a subject where, like I said, I don't know much about it, but it is interesting to hear about your approach and your problems. And is there a hidden question in here? Is there a question that I'm not asking that you wish I was asking you right now?
Oh, I would love to talk about kind of what we hear in our field, all of us entrepreneurs about what we should be doing for marketing versus the array of options of how we can approach it differently. Because that's something that I found really interesting and enjoyable in my entrepreneur journey. And I feel like it's not talked about enough.
And so what do you mean exactly about like what we should be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I have a fairly unique approach to how I do the marketing for my business, but whenever I talk with other entrepreneurs, there's always this stress around marketing. It's like, oh, I read we should all be doing this thing now, or this gets better visibility, or this is the new trend that we all should be doing. And I just I lost interest in any of that a long time ago because for me, I have a very different approach with how I think about sharing about my business because if people find me and they hire me, that's great. We all have bills we want to pay, but that's not really why I do it. I find it so much more enjoyable to approach, the various accounts for my business. And I've really, as the years have gone by, honed in on which ones I enjoy spending time in and really just focused on those. And I don't try to be everywhere in all the places, but I'm not trying to convince people that they should work with me. I'm sharing, this is who I am. This is what excites me. This is my philosophy about the field and about business and just being a human. And then it allows people who might potentially hire me or be colleagues or be friends with me in the future to get a sense of, oh, this is who this person is. I resonate with this or I don't. And then I found the more I've just been very, very authentically candid in sharing in these ways about, because I can't talk about what I'm actually literally doing. This excites me. Here's what I think about this art related topic. I get more and more aligned clients because people have a sense of when they decide they want to work with me, they really have a pretty good, body of information to assess, oh, this is who this person is. And so it's actually made my job over the years a lot more fun because I've met so many delightful people who, they often say like, I've read these things or I looked at these things and this was, I resonated. And so for all entrepreneurs, I would encourage them to, instead of thinking of marketing as, well, even just marketing, I don't really think about it as marketing. I think about it as sharing what excites me to my community, which includes people I may not yet know. I've made wonderful friends through, my online accounts and through just being myself in a public space, representing my business. And that to me has been a real bomb for the, the grind of entrepreneurship. So I wanted to share that way of reconceptualizing it for anyone listening who might be in that a place where they're just feeling really kind of worn down with, oh, great, what's the next marketing thing I'm supposed to be doing now? And to not even think about it in that way. Think about it from a spirit of fun and creativity and sharing.
I like that. And people always pay lip service to these things like abundance or authenticity, but you're actually doing it. And what's great about that is it doesn't mean that you're being cowardly or you're being lazy. I mean, heck, I found you on LinkedIn and I said, do a podcast. And you were like, hey, I'm there. You weren't stingy about what it is that you or don't do, but that's a good kind of insight that there's definitely the FOMO, right? With new social platforms, a new way of marketing. And it's what you're saying there is the reminder that, well, it's about the people, right? That, well, sure, there's like the TikTok or the Threads or X or whatever, but there's people out there who have this problem, who have a need for appraisal or further education about their art or what they have, or for insurance or for what, or the estate or whatever. They're stuck. They have these problems, and you're looking to connect with these people, and you do that by, like you said, you share what excites you. And so that's a really cool kind of reassurance, because I think we all feel like we are missing out, right? Because we see these people that they post 20 times a day, and they're on these platforms, and everything they post gets like 10,000 comments, and it's like, hey, why not me? And so what I'm getting from you is you're saying it's about the quality of people, not the quantity. And what you see superficially on social media, they're like, you see all the likes and comments, but like, are those really sales? Are those really people that are interested? Or maybe those are bots? Or it's like it's a way more sustainable and fulfilling to do what you do, is to say, well, I'm all about the people. And also you mentioned that you're about the networking, right? You network with the podcasts and with the magazines. You're not just in it by yourself. You're looking to make this kind of people connection in many different ways.
Yeah, it's for me, it's really about fostering communities. And particularly for social media, I'm not aiming to get new clients in those communities. I mean, I find them very fulfilling for connecting with other colleagues, making friends, learning from other colleagues. And a lot of my, the things I end up doing in those realms, or the podcast interviews I go on, or the presentations I do, someone may stumble upon them later and find them and then hire me. But I really have created a sense of detachment from an outcome in what I create. I'm creating because it may be helpful to someone someday. And that, it may come back to me a year from now in the form of someone reaching out, or it may never. Like, I don't really have a attachment to what happens. It's just, am I generating good? And there's a lot, especially in the arts field, which is not at all regulated, or not nearly well regulated. There's just all kinds of not great stuff that goes on. And so it's particularly important for me to generate as much useful information as possible that I can just put out in the public space, so that people can find it and make an informed decision, a better informed decision than they might have otherwise. And they might have something that I'm not competent to appraise. They might be on the other side of the world. It's fun actually looking at the analytics sometimes, because people are reading these things from all over the globe. And so I would encourage other entrepreneurs who are kind of just feeling fed up with being told the latest thing they're supposed to do, to just think about it in a much bigger picture, holistic sense of, what kind of organic impact do you want to make in your field, and share your philosophy, or shift how things are done in your field in a subtle way, and then approach what you share from that. Because the more I've detached from an outcome, the more fun I've had, and the more wonderful people I've met. And it's just, I could never go back because I'm having too much fun.
I like that. Have fun, detach from the outcome, and provide something that is useful. And I can relate to that. Sometimes I'll be programming some little solution, and I will say, like, here's the code, here's a YouTube video showing how to work it. And I'm not thinking like, hey, maybe this will lead to some client. And then likewise, like, say I find someone's like TEDx talk, I'm never saying like, oh, well, here's someone who had a really good TEDx talk on the subject, maybe I should hire them. Usually it's kind of the opposite, right? Usually it's like, well, there's someone that maybe I'm looking into, like, well, can they provide the service for me? And I might do some Googling and see what their social footprint is, and then be like, oh, cool, they have a book, they have a TikTok, and that's kind of further trust building. But it's very rare for me, like, for the content to then be a straight line towards the hiring. And when we all know that it's a very small percentage, right? Most of what you're creating for the teaching doesn't lead to anything, and that's okay. But it's for just the right people, it still works, and that's what you said pays the bills. But then there's a lot of just like freeness going around, because that's what the internet was supposed to be in the beginning, right? When they promised it to us. And imagine if you had to pay for Google, or pay for Facebook, or pay to like go on Amazon. That would be ridiculous. The internet is about free, and about kind of adding to the knowledge. So that way, when you make this really specific Google search about this piece of art that you have, then it leads to something, because us human workers are kind of filling in the gaps of what's there. And so this is kind of cool to think about, especially about your mindset and your process. So about moving towards the future, what has you excited that you're allowed to share, of course? What is in the works? What's coming up for you?
Well, this is a real trick question. Now I have to think about what I can talk about. Well, of course, lots of exciting things I can't talk about, but I just thinking in a big picture way, as you know, humans are freaking out daily about AI and what AI might do for, good and bad for our culture. For me, it's really been a moment to kind of root even deeper in my own humanity and my own work and my own voice. I it's a much longer answer of kind of all of the potential risks of AI, but I think the more, and I see it already, you can hear the cadence of something that didn't originate from somebody sitting at their desk typing. And I see that in my feed, I see that in my emails. And so the more that happens and the greater volume that we're all bombarded by that is AI generated or AI aided, I feel like I'm just going to, like those authentic, imperfect human voices will become more and more rare. And that's I I think that remaining true to that is at least going to be my approach because I don't I don't want to turn my brain over to a robot.
Right. Right. Yeah. Like you want to keep your humanity. And I do know what you're talking about, where you see some social posts or some marketing copy, and you're like, this seems a little weird. Like this isn't written by a person. And then the AI generated art, it still is fake looking, but I imagine that it will get to the point where you kind of won't be able to distinguish it or almost. And speaking of the weirdness. A few years ago, did you deal with any sort of NFT kind of issues, or is that outside of your scope?
Oh, I actually wrote a bit of a manifesto on my blog when NFTs first, were the big thing because they use so much energy. And I was writing about from an energy perspective that I thought it was irresponsible to add to the climate change precipice with this massive, massive load on the grid, using up so much energy for NFTs. And I didn't really speak to all of the other issues I had with them at that point in time, but mainly just like why do we want to in the art world be active participants in killing the earth even more than it's already being killed. And but yet I didn't value any NFTs. My good friend Claudia Hess, who's an appraiser out in the Bay Area, she's actually an NFT expert, digital art expert. She wrote a book on NFTs. Anybody who needs to get NFTs appraised, call Claudia. But it's yeah, I mean, I see a lot of parallels in how the public reception is in the early stages to everyone's like, oh my gosh, NFTs, this is great. And, same with AI without actually stopping and having the critical thinking, like, wait a second, like what's useful, what's not useful, what's dangerous. And so, yeah, I think people, when they're surrounded by everything that feels the same, the things that pop out and stand out that are human voices are really going to resonate because they'll be so rare and people will be hungry for that. And I do think that the energetics of how you go about entrepreneurship, people do feel that on some level. Like, I don't, when I am sharing about what I do, it's not from a place of scarcity, as you said, the whole scarcity abundance stereotype. But I really do think there's something in that, and that it's if people can sense you are genuinely committed to trying to make your field better and help them, give them information whether they hire you or not, I think it makes a difference in how that's received and then how it eventually comes back to you. And also in our age where everything is like, how many clicks did this get, how many likes did this get, it's instantaneous. Everybody wants an answer to their email in like an hour. I think people forget about the long view too. Like I get jobs from things I wrote 5 years ago. Like I almost forgot I wrote them, but somebody's like, oh, I just read this and I need you to do this, and it's like, oh wow, I'm glad me 5 years ago did that thing. So we forget that it's, to me, it's more of a garden mentality where we're planting all these seeds. We don't know what's going to germinate and grow, and sometimes it may grow 4 years from now. But you can't be emotionally invested in saying grow, grow, grow right now, because that's never going to happen in business.
Right, have the patience and the delayed gratification, but again, that also doesn't mean to sit around and wait and do nothing. You're saying have opinions, express yourself, and put out the energetics, as you say. And like I was talking to a guy just last week who said he's like, I remember you from high school. and I'm almost 40 now. He was like, I was a customer of yours when you were in high school. And I was like, geez, that's quite a long time for someone to know you. And this guy, I think I'd met him like once, maybe 10 years ago. And so it was like kind of weird how like you leave all the breadcrumbs, the trails, all the little things that you do, and it all matters, but you probably won't see you for sure won't see every single person that it matters to, right? Every person that reads your magazine or listens to a podcast that you're on, you usually don't see the end result of that, but it all matters, and it's a good kind of motivator to keep going. And so if someone was just excited and amazed by the possibilities of what you've done, right? And about the appraising and the art and all these other things, how does someone kind of take the next step here? How do they find out what you have going on, what opinions and facts you're expressing? Where do we find the magazine, podcast, website, all those things? Where do we go?
Thank you. Great question. I have a lot of things on my website, which is artifactualhistory.com. So that's kind of everything spokes out of that. The magazine is Worthwhile Magazine. So that's worthwhilemagazine.com. That's free online as well. On my website, I have a lot of links to past interviews I've done, the video recordings, podcast interviews, links to the Art Elevator podcast. You can find the Art Elevator on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and that is again with my good friend Larissa Wild. So yeah, that's the other thing. It's really fun to, when you add side projects, to not have to take them on solo and instead to collaborate with people you really enjoy working with and respect. So it makes entrepreneurship less lonely too, because we all have those days where it's like we're at a computer and we don't talk to a human and it's just working all day. And so being able to collaborate for something that is philosophically important to us with friends makes it just the whole experience so much sweeter. And also, I'm on Instagram. I started this year a new little project. Again, it's, with the spirit of fun. I keep asking myself, what would be more fun for me? So every month, so this year I've been posting a mood board where it's just, I go through my saved posts and collect a sampling of things that I really liked and then just put them together as a post each month, which is fun for me to see. And then hopefully it's fun for the people watching it to kind of get a sense of what is exciting and inspiring me visually this month and kind of my aesthetic. I'm on LinkedIn, Sarah Reader on LinkedIn. I post a lot on LinkedIn. That's fun for me. I'm always posting neat articles I find and commentary, and just I try to keep everything positive and really I try to have a solutions oriented approach in my commentary, as much as possible, because I think there are so many really exciting possibilities for the field in the future, and it's important for me to root in that perspective in what I share.
Wonderful. And so that website that we mentioned is artifactualhistory.com, and
Mhm.
Sarah Reader on Instagram and on LinkedIn. That's Reeder. And I just love what you're saying here about how it's important to pursue the fun and the optimism and figure out what's useful. And if you're feeling that loneliness, see who you can partner up with, because sometimes you get each other excited and sometimes you get each other excited, like one's maybe not as excited and one is, but also you're both excited. And then you're like both even like times 10, even more, like a third person exists in between you who like is the like takes on the persona of this podcast that you're doing together, and it can be just, and then other people see the fun that you're having and they have fun too, and like that's what we want, right? Is to tap into some of these things that you know can help people but can also be entertaining, so you can have both sides of that, right? You can have the information but also the excitedness as well. And so that is artifactualhistory.com and Sarah Reader on Instagram and on LinkedIn. And so if you for all these different reasons, right? If you have this interest in the art or the appraisal, or you just want to see how someone kind of gets excited about the minutia and the side projects and the randomness of everyday life and of doing the work, then check out what Sarah Reader is posting on LinkedIn. And as we're winding down our conversation here, Sarah, it's time to put you on the spot a little bit and ask for a fun quote or lesson that you think we can really benefit from. So does anything come to mind just off the cuff, on the spot, as far as a quote or lesson?
Oh gosh, I would say, I go back to the follow the fun in business, because we lose sense of that as we're just in the toil and the kind of the service orientation, and as everything speeds up in our culture and it's just, so fast and endless. Building community, whether it's fellow entrepreneurs, people who can understand the very specific kind of challenges of entrepreneur life, and also just in the things you actually do have to do, keep continually asking yourself, can I do this in a way that is more enjoyable? Can I do this in a way that's going to have a more positive impact? That's for whatever field someone's in. I would recommend that if you're feeling kind of stuck or burnt out, to ask yourself, is there anything in that you can apply to your situation? And yeah, on Instagram, actually, I'm at Artifactual History. So not my name, it's Artifactual History on Instagram, but I think that we forget that we don't have to do things in the way that we're always told we have to do things. We have the creative power to make our own decisions and figure out what is going to work best for us. And so I would encourage people listening to experiment, try, say, oh, wait, maybe I don't need to do this thing that I read a blog post that is what I need to do for marketing this season. Just experiment with what actually feels really enjoyable and authentic to you, and see where that goes.
That's wonderful. And I think there's some like Peter Drucker quote that's something like to do well in business, you have to do like the boring tasks repetitively. But what you're saying here is that, we're adults and there's sure our days are filled with things we have to do, but you're saying seek the fun, find the fun, experiment. And even if there are these things that you have to do, then find some enjoyment in that, because otherwise what's the point, right? And use your creativity to find it, look for the fun, and we can do that by going to Artifactual History on Instagram, where you can see things like Sarah's blog and services, testimonials, as she said, podcast appearances, etc. And the artifactualhistory.com and Artifactual History on Instagram. So it's been wonderful speaking with you, Sarah, and just going through all the topics and the randomness. That's what the life is all about, right? And entrepreneurialism and the communication. It's all about there's the variety and then also the uncertainty. And it's just a lot of fun to just embrace the crazy, chaotic whirlpool of life, and that might also include the randomness that you find in your art history and your appraising. I'm sure there's so much just randomness and things to be excited about. So thank you for expressing your excitement so that we can be excited with us. And artifactualhistory.com is the place to go. And so thanks for stopping by, Sarah.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate the opportunity.